Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the massive council chamber, looking up at the towering alien forms that surrounded her. The Galactic Council had built this place to make smaller species feel tiny and unimportant. Today, she felt anything but small. The Zephyrian Chancellor loomed over her from his crystal throne. His blue skin rippled with what humans had learned meant amusement. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species watched. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others breathed methane through gill slits. A few existed as pure energy contained in metal shells. "So," the Chancellor said, his voice booming through the translation devices, "the humans want equal voting rights again." Sarah held up the data pad containing Earth's proposal. She had spent months preparing it. The document showed everything humanity had contributed to galactic civilization over the past 200 years: trade route management, diplomatic solutions to 12 major wars, technological innovations that had improved life for billions. "We have been members of this council for 2 centuries, she said. "In that time, humans have helped solve every major crisis the galaxy has faced. We deserve a voice equal to other founding members." The Mantari representative clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his insect-like species. "Humans speak of equality, but what do you truly offer? Your lifespans are short. Your technology is borrowed from us. Your physical abilities are weak compared to most species here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The hegemony's military leader, a massive creature covered in scales and spines, nodded his approval. Even the peaceful gardener species, who looked like walking trees, swayed in what seemed like agreement. Sarah felt her jaw clench. This was exactly the attitude that had brought her here today. "Our contributions speak for themselves," she said. "Check your trade records. See who coordinates supply lines between the outer rim and core worlds. Look at your diplomatic archives. Count how many peace treaties were negotiated by human mediators." "Details," the Chancellor waved a dismissive hand. "Busy work that any species could handle. You should be grateful we allow you observer status at all." The chamber filled with what passed for laughter among the various species. Sarah had heard it all before. Humans were useful servants, nothing more. They fixed problems that the superior species found too boring or beneath their notice. Chancellor Veltar leaned forward on his throne. "In fact, we have a new task for humanity. The Void Swarm has launched attacks on 3 border systems. We need ground troops for the counterattack. Humans breed quickly and adapt well to different environments. Your soldiers will be perfect for this mission." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You want to conscript our people for your war?" "Conscript is such an ugly word," the Mantari representative buzzed. "Think of it as mandatory service, for the good of the galaxy." "And naturally," the Chancellor continued, "military strategy will be handled by more experienced species. Humans will follow orders, not give them." The other representatives made sounds of approval. To them, this seemed perfectly reasonable. Humans were tools to be used, not partners to be consulted. Sarah looked around the chamber one more time. She saw beings who commanded star fleets and ruled entire star systems, species that had mastered faster-than-light travel before humans discovered fire, creatures whose individual lifespans stretched longer than human civilization itself, but in all their ancient wisdom and advanced technology, they had learned nothing about respect. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a formal document sealed with Earth's official hologram. The sight of it made several representatives sit up straighter. Formal documents usually meant trade agreements or tribute payments. "Chancellor Veltar, representatives of the Galactic Council," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "I present to you Earth's official response to your proposal." She held the document high enough for everyone to see, then activated its recording function so her words would be preserved in the official record. Humanity hereby formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All trade agreements between Earth and Council species are terminated. All diplomatic missions are recalled. All joint research projects are canceled. All military cooperation agreements are void. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could hear the hum of the life support systems and the distant sound of space traffic outside the station. Chancellor Veltar was the first to react. "You cannot be serious. Earth needs the Council more than we need you. Your world would starve without our trade routes. Our colonies would be defenseless without Council protection," added the hegemony military commander. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "We'll see about that." She tucked the document back into her jacket and turned toward the exit. "All human personnel will be evacuated from Council space within 30 days. Any attempt to prevent their departure or to conscript human soldiers will be considered an act of war." "This is madness," the Mantari representative buzzed loudly. "You'll come crawling back within months. Your precious Earth will realize how much it needs us." Sarah paused at the chamber's exit. "Chancellor, you've spent 2 centuries taking credit for human innovations and calling our diplomacy luck. You've used our people to solve your problems while denying us basic respect. Today, you've learned that even the most patient species has limits." She walked out without waiting for a response. Behind her, the chamber erupted in angry chittering, roaring, and electronic screeching. But beneath the outrage, she could hear something else: uncertainty. On the journey back to Earth, Sarah's assistant, a young man named Marcus, sat across from her in the shuttle. "Ambassador, do you really think Earth can survive without the Council?" Sarah looked out at the stars rushing past their viewport. "Marcus, for 200 years, humans have been the glue holding galactic civilization together. We've solved their problems, managed their trade, and kept their wars from spreading. They never notice because we made it look easy. But what if they're right? What if we do need them more than they need us?" Sarah turned back to him with a confident smile. "Then I guess we're about to find out who's been carrying whom all these years." The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, carrying them away from the Council station and toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known continued its daily business, unaware that its foundation had just walked away. 3 weeks after humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Council, Administrator Zekron sat in his office staring at reports that made no sense. The Mantari had always prided themselves on running the most efficient trade networks in the galaxy. Their automated systems could move cargo across 50 star systems without a single error. Until now. "Sir," his assistant buzzed nervously through her translator, "the Outer Rim agricultural shipments are 6 days behind schedule. The Centauri colonies are reporting food shortages." Zekran's mandibles clicked in frustration. "How is this possible? Our computers handle everything automatically. They have for decades." "That's just it, sir. The computers are working perfectly, but they keep asking for manual confirmation on route changes and supply adjustments. The prompts are strange. They ask questions like, 'What would humans do here?' and 'Consider cultural preferences of destination species.'" The administrator pulled up the shipping software on his holographic display. Sure enough, dozens of error messages flashed red across the screen. Each one requested human input or cultural advisor consultation before proceeding. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Our engineers built these systems. Why would they need humans?" His assistant's antennae drooped. "Sir, I accessed the development archives. It appears human programmers wrote most of the adaptive algorithms. Our engineers provided the hardware, but humans created the decision-making software." Zekron felt his stomach acid churn. For 50 years, the Mantari had boasted about their superior logistics technology. Trade deals had been won because of their advanced shipping systems. Now he was learning that humans had quietly built the brains of his operation. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the crystal spires of Zephyr Prime, Chancellor Veltar received reports that made his blue skin turn pale gray. "What do you mean the peace treaty between the mining guilds has collapsed?" he demanded. Foreign Minister Luxara consulted her data tablet nervously. The Belkan and Orion guilds resumed their border dispute 3 days ago. 17 mining stations have been destroyed. Both sides claim the other violated the Prometheus Accords. The Prometheus Accords have kept peace in that sector for 15 years. Yes, sir. But apparently the treaty included provisions for regular mediation sessions. Those sessions were conducted by human diplomats. Without them, minor disputes have escalated into armed conflict. Veltar stood and paced across his office, his large frame casting shifting shadows on the walls. "Send our best negotiators. This should be simple to resolve." "We tried, sir. Our diplomatic team used standard council mediation procedures. Both guild leaders walked out after 2 hours. They said our approach was too rigid and didn't address the real issues." The Chancellor stopped pacing. "What are the real issues?" "According to guild records, the Belkans feel disrespected because their cultural traditions weren't considered in mining schedules. The Orions are angry because their religious holidays weren't factored into trade agreements. The human mediators apparently spent months learning about both cultures before negotiating." Veltar sank into his chair. His people were brilliant scientists and engineers, but they had always found other species' cultural quirks unnecessary and time-consuming. Humans seemed to actually enjoy learning about alien customs. The military situation was even worse. Admiral Kethvar of the Hegemony Fleet stood in his command center, watching tactical displays that showed nothing but red defeat markers. "Explain this to me again," he growled to his tactical officer, a younger Hegemony warrior named Torvan. "Sir, our assault on the Void Swarm's forward positions failed completely. We lost 3 heavy cruisers and a carrier group. Our battle plans were perfect according to all tactical analysis." "Then why did we lose?" Torvan's scales rippled with embarrassment. "The enemy used unpredictable attack patterns. Our strategic computers couldn't compensate for their irregular formations and random strike timing." Admiral Kethvar's spines extended in anger. "Our tactical systems have won hundreds of battles. They calculate every possible enemy response." "Yes, sir. But I've been reviewing our past victories against the Void Swarm. In every successful engagement, we had human tactical advisors present. Their recommendations were always entered as computer suggestions in the official reports." The Admiral's blood ran cold. "Are you telling me humans have been planning our battles?" "Not planning, sir. But they provided what the files call creative input and unconventional solutions. Our computers are excellent at analyzing known patterns, but humans seem to predict enemy behavior that didn't match any logical model." On the bridge, alarms began sounding. The communications officer looked up with fear in his eyes. "Sir, Void Swarm forces have broken through the Kepler defense line. They're advancing on 3 core systems." Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display in horror. The Kepler line had held for 7 years. It was supposed to be impenetrable. Back on Mantari Prime, Administrator Zekron was dealing with cascading failures across multiple sectors. Food shipments sat rotting in cargo holds because cultural dietary restrictions weren't being followed. Medical supplies were delayed because the automated systems couldn't account for different species' biological needs. Trade routes that had run smoothly for decades were collapsing into chaos. "Sir," his assistant reported, "we're receiving emergency requests for human logistics specialists from 17 different systems. Some are offering to pay triple the standard consulting rates." "Don't they understand?" Zekron clicked his mandibles angrily. "Humans have cut all ties with the Council. They're not coming back." "Actually, sir, some systems are trying to contact human colonies directly." The Vega Trading Collective has already hired human coordinators as independent contractors. Zekron felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. If individual systems started making separate deals with humans, the Council's authority would crumble. Worse, the Mantari would lose their reputation as the galaxy's logistics experts. He pulled up the galactic news feeds on his display. The headlines were getting worse every day. Food riots on Centauri 7. Mining war escalates in Prometheus sector. Void swarm advances after Council defeats. 3 weeks ago, the galaxy had been peaceful and prosperous. Trade flowed smoothly between systems. Diplomatic crises were resolved quickly. Military campaigns succeeded with minimal losses. Now everything was falling apart, and the one common factor in every crisis was the absence of humans. The worst part was the growing realization that this wasn't just coincidence. As administrators dug through archives and military commanders reviewed old battle reports, the same pattern emerged everywhere. Behind every success, every peaceful resolution, every innovative solution, there had been humans working quietly in the background. They hadn't demanded credit or recognition. They had simply done the work that needed doing, solved the problems that needed solving, and kept the galaxy running smoothly. The Council species had been so focused on maintaining their own prestige that they never noticed how much they depended on the species they considered inferior. As Administrator Zekron watched his carefully ordered trade networks collapse into chaos, he began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. The humans hadn't just left the Council. They had taken the invisible foundation of galactic civilization with them. And without that foundation, everything was starting to crumble. Admiral Kethvar led the Council's punitive fleet toward the human colony of New Geneva with grim satisfaction. The past month had been a nightmare of military defeats and collapsing supply lines, but that was about to change. It was time to remind these arrogant humans where they belonged in the galactic order. 6 star destroyers, 12 heavy cruisers, and 40 escort ships, reported his tactical officer, against a single human colony with no military installations. This should be over quickly. The Admiral's scales rippled with anticipation. Good. We'll destroy their orbital facilities and force their surrender. Once word spreads that the Council has crushed human defiance, other colonies will fall in line. As the fleet dropped out of hyperspace near New Geneva, Kethvar expected to see a helpless farming world with minimal defenses. Instead, his sensors detected something impossible. "Sir," the tactical officer stammered, "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. The humans they've turned everything into weapons." On the main display, New Geneva's asteroid mining stations bristled with improvised railguns. Cargo ships had been fitted with missile pods welded to their hulls. Even the orbital solar collectors had been modified, their focusing mirrors now aimed at approaching vessels instead of the system's star. "How did they accomplish this so quickly?" Kethvar demanded. "It's been less than 6 weeks since they left the Council." His weapons officer, a seasoned veteran of dozens of campaigns, studied the readings with growing unease. "Sir, these modifications shouldn't be possible. They've taken civilian mining equipment and turned it into military hardware. Our tactical computers don't even recognize half these weapon configurations." Before the Admiral could respond, his communications array came alive with incoming transmissions. But instead of surrender offers, he heard something that chilled his blood, human voices, calm and coordinated, directing a defensive fleet that shouldn't exist. "Mining Platform 7 to Cargo Group 3. Redirect your approach vector to intercept Angle 47. Freighter Lucky Strike. Arm your improvised torpedo tubes and prepare for close engagement." Kethvar watched in horrified fascination as converted cargo haulers moved with military precision, their civilian crews executing maneuvers that his own trained pilots would struggle to match. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, "multiple missile launches detected. They're using mining charges as warheads." The Council fleet's advanced shields easily deflected the first wave of attacks, but as Kethvar prepared to order his counterattack, something extraordinary happened. The humans adapted. The second wave of missiles carried electromagnetic pulse generators, jury-rigged from communication equipment. The third wave deployed clouds of mining dust that interfered with targeting sensors. The fourth wave came from completely unexpected directions as human ships used the system's asteroid field for cover. "This is impossible," the Admiral muttered. "Our intelligence said they had no military training." "They don't," replied his intelligence officer, consulting her data files with shaking hands. "New Geneva is an agricultural colony. Most of the population are farmers and miners, but they're learning. Sir, they're adapting their tactics in real time, faster than our combat computers can compensate." What Admiral Kethvar witnessed over the next 4 hours challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The humans didn't fight like any species in Council records. They didn't follow established tactical doctrine or rely on superior technology. Instead, they innovated. A cargo ship captain used his vessel's gravity manipulation systems to hurl asteroids at Council cruisers. Mining crews reprogrammed their excavation robots to disable enemy ships by targeting specific hull sections. Even the colony's agricultural workers joined the fight, using crop-dusting aircraft loaded with sensor-jamming chaff. Every time the Council fleet adapted to one tactic, the humans invented 3 new ones. They turned their technological disadvantage into an advantage, using equipment in ways its designers never intended. The decisive moment came when a single human freighter, badly damaged and apparently helpless, drifted toward the Admiral's flagship. Kethvar almost ignored it, focused on more dangerous threats. Then his sensors detected an energy buildup unlike anything in his ship's database. "What are they doing?" he demanded. His chief engineer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, they've rigged their fusion reactor to overload. They're turning their ship into a bomb. But the energy pattern, they've modified the containment field to create a directed blast. It's not just an explosion, it's a focused weapon." The freighter detonated in a brilliant flash that disabled 3 Council destroyers and sent shockwaves through the entire fleet. As emergency alarms wailed throughout his command ship, Admiral Kethvar realized the horrible truth. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were winning. "All ships retreat to minimum safe distance," he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. "Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump." As the Council fleet limped away from New Geneva, leaving behind 6 destroyed vessels and hundreds of casualties, Admiral Kethvar tried to understand what had gone wrong. His forces had overwhelming technological superiority. They had more ships, better weapons, and centuries of military experience. But the humans had something else. They had the ability to see possibilities where others saw only limitations. They could take any tool, any situation, any challenge, and find a way to turn it to their advantage. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other consequences of humanity's absence were becoming impossible to ignore. On the research station Helix Prime, Dr. Vexaria stared at her latest experimental results with growing despair. For 15 years, her team had made breakthrough discoveries in quantum mechanics every few months. Their work had revolutionized energy production and faster-than-light communication. Now, for 6 weeks, they had achieved nothing. "Dr. Vexaria," her assistant approached cautiously, "the synthesis project has failed again. The quantum resonance patterns are unstable." The lead scientist, a member of the highly intelligent ethereal species, felt confusion and frustration unlike anything she had experienced. "Run the calculations again. There must be an error in our methodology." "We've run them 17 times, Doctor. The mathematics are perfect, but the practical application isn't working." Dr. Vexaria floated to her lab's observation window, her energy-based form flickering with agitation. "Bring me the archives of our previous successes." I want to review every breakthrough we've achieved." Hours later, she discovered the pattern that filled her with dread. Every major innovation in her lab's history had come from collaboration with human researchers, not human scientists. The humans involved were usually technicians, graduate students, or even maintenance workers. But they had all shared one trait. They asked questions that made no logical sense. What if we tried it backwards? Could this work underwater? What would happen if we used sound instead of light? The Ethereals had initially dismissed these questions as primitive thinking. But when they had tested these illogical suggestions, breakthrough discoveries had followed. The humans had a way of looking at problems that bypassed logical analysis entirely. They could make intuitive leaps that led to solutions no rational mind would consider. Without them, even the most brilliant species in the galaxy found themselves trapped in logical dead ends. Similar revelations were occurring throughout Council space. Medical research had stalled as alien doctors realized their diagnostic breakthroughs had come from human colleagues who could sense illness patterns that didn't show up in standard tests. Engineering projects failed as designers discovered they had been relying on human consultants to suggest impossible solutions that somehow worked. The most frightening discovery came from the Council's war against the Void Swarm. As Admiral Kethvar reviewed classified files, he learned that every successful campaign against the alien invaders had involved human tactical input. Not because humans were better generals, but because they could predict enemy behavior that made no sense according to standard military theory. The Void Swarm fought in patterns that violated every logical rule of warfare. Only humans had been able to understand their seemingly random tactics and develop effective counter-strategies. Now, without human insight, the Council's military forces were suffering defeat after defeat. The Void Swarm was advancing deeper into civilized space, and no one seemed able to stop them. As reports poured in from across the galaxy, trade networks failing, research programs stalling, military campaigns collapsing, a terrible truth became undeniable. The species that the Council had dismissed as inferior had actually been the keystone holding galactic civilization together, and without them, everything was falling apart. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going for 18 hours, and Chancellor Veltar could see it was accomplishing nothing. Around the Great Chamber, representatives from the remaining member species argued, accused, and threatened each other, while their civilization crumbled around them. "The Mantari trade networks have completely failed," roared General Thakmor of the hegemony. "Half my worlds are facing starvation because of your incompetence." Administrator Zekron's mandibles clicked furiously. "Our systems worked perfectly for decades. It's not our fault they depended on human programmers." "Enough!" Chancellor Veltar's voice boomed through the chamber. "Fighting among ourselves will not solve our crisis." But even as he spoke, he could see it was too late. The council that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was dying before his eyes. The ethereal representative flickered with agitation. 3 more star systems declared independence yesterday. The Proxima Alliance has formed their own trade federation. The Rim worlds are negotiating directly with human colonies for technical assistance. "Traitors," spat the Mantari administrator. "They violate their council oaths." "What council?" laughed the delegate from the Crystal Collective, her crystalline form ringing like broken bells. "Look around you. 12 species have already withdrawn. Half the remaining members haven't paid their council fees in months. We're shadows ruling over shadows." Chancellor Veltar slumped in his throne. In just 3 months, everything had fallen apart. The galaxy that had once been united under council authority was now fractured into dozens of competing factions. Ancient rivalries that had been suppressed for centuries had erupted into open warfare. The Zephyrian-Mantari Cold War had exploded into a devastating conflict that had already claimed 4 star systems. The mining guild's dispute had triggered a cascade of violence that left entire sectors uninhabitable. Even peaceful species were arming themselves as trade routes became battlegrounds. "Sir," his aide approached nervously, "we've received another transmission from the Human Colony Confederation. They're offering to mediate peace talks." The chamber fell silent. Every representative knew about the Terran Cooperative, the loose alliance of human worlds that had formed after Earth's withdrawal. Intelligence reports painted a picture that was both admirable and infuriating. While the Council species tore each other apart, human colonies were thriving. They had developed new technologies at a pace that seemed impossible. Their agricultural systems had achieved unprecedented efficiency. Most shocking of all, they had somehow made contact with the Void Swarm. "It's impossible," muttered the Hegemony General. "No one can communicate with the Swarm. They're mindless destroyers." But the evidence was undeniable. 3 weeks ago, Void Swarm attacks had simply stopped. Captured Council intelligence revealed the truth. Human diplomats had established communication with the alien invaders and negotiated a ceasefire. The method was typically human and completely illogical. Instead of using standard diplomatic protocols, they had sent mathematicians, artists, and musicians to the Swarm's territory. Somehow, these creative minds had found a way to bridge the gap between human and alien consciousness. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human xenolinguist, had made the breakthrough. She had approached Swarm communication not as language, but as art. Complex patterns that conveyed emotion rather than information. Where Council experts had failed for decades, humans had succeeded in months. Now the Void Swarm, far from being mindless destroyers, had revealed themselves as a nomadic species, driven to violence by Council expansion into their traditional breeding grounds. The invasion had been a desperate attempt to reclaim territory that belonged to them by ancient right. "The humans want us to come to Earth," the Chancellor's aide continued. "They say they'll guarantee safe passage for all Council representatives." General Thackmore's spines bristled with rage. "We should be dictating terms to them, not begging for their help." "With what authority?" the Crystal Collective delegate chimed mockingly. "Half the galaxy no longer recognizes Council sovereignty. Our fleet is scattered fighting brush wars. Even our own member species are defecting." Chancellor Veltar closed his eyes and tried to remember when it had all started going wrong. 3 months ago, he had been ruler of the greatest civilization in galactic history. Now he presided over ruins and refugees. The irony was bitter and complete. The species they had dismissed as inferior had been holding their entire society together. Every success the Council had claimed was built on human innovation, human mediation, human ingenuity. They had taken credit for human accomplishments while treating humans as servants. Now those servants were gone, and the masters had revealed themselves as helpless without them. "Sir," another aide interrupted, "we're receiving urgent reports from the Tau Ceti system. The situation there is dire." The Chancellor activated his holographic display, and immediately wished he hadn't. Tau Ceti had been one of the Council's crown jewels, a perfect example of multi-species cooperation. 5 different civilizations had shared the system peacefully for over a century. Now it was a war zone. Without human mediators to resolve cultural misunderstandings and coordinate resource sharing, the species had turned on each other. Ancient prejudices and forgotten grievances had erupted into violence that left 3 planets uninhabitable. "How many dead?" Veltar asked quietly. "Preliminary estimates suggest 12 million casualties, sir, and the fighting is spreading." Around the chamber, representatives received similar reports from their home territories. The pattern was always the same. Without humans to serve as bridges between different cultures and mindsets, cooperation collapsed into conflict. The species of the Council were brilliant in their own ways. The ethereals were master scientists. The Mantari were engineering geniuses. The hegemony produced superb warriors. But none of them had humanity's gift for understanding and connecting with minds unlike their own. Humans had been the translators who made multi-species civilization possible. They had found common ground between species that had nothing in common except their need to coexist. They had built the invisible networks of trust and cooperation that held the galaxy together. Without them, the Council's member species discovered they were strangers who happened to share the same space, strangers who increasingly saw each other as threats rather than allies. Chancellor, the ethereal representative, pulsed with urgent energy. I've been analyzing the mathematical models behind our societal collapse. If current trends continue, galactic civilization will fragment into warring tribal groups within 6 months. Can we reverse the process? Veltar asked desperately. Not without the human factor. They provided stability patterns we cannot replicate through logic alone. Our attempts to create artificial mediation systems have all failed. We need actual humans with their unique cognitive approaches. General Thakmor stood abruptly, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Then we take them back by force. The hegemony still has battle groups in reserve. We can compel human compliance. The chamber erupted in arguments, but Chancellor Veltar was no longer listening. He was reading intelligence reports about what had happened to the last council force that had tried to attack a human colony. The Battle of New Geneva had been a wake-up call, but subsequent encounters had been even more devastating. Humans didn't just defend themselves. They learned from every engagement and shared that knowledge throughout their confederation. By now, human colonies had developed defensive capabilities that made attacking them virtual suicide. Worse, several council species had secretly begun negotiating with human worlds for technical assistance and mediation services. The humans were demanding high prices, not in money or resources, but in respect and equal treatment. Species that had once dismissed humans as inferior were now competing to hire human advisors. The galaxy was learning that there were problems that could only be solved with human insight, innovations that only emerged from human creativity, conflicts that only humans could resolve. As the emergency session devolved into chaos, Chancellor Veltar made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. He would go to Earth himself. He would kneel before the species he had once mocked and beg for their help. Because the alternative was watching galactic civilization tear itself apart, and that was a price too terrible to pay, even for his pride. The shuttle carrying Chancellor Veltar approached Earth's orbital station with none of the fanfare that had once accompanied council delegations. No honor guards waited to greet him. No ceremonial protocols marked his arrival. He came as a supplicant, not a ruler, and everyone knew it. Ambassador Sarah Chen met him at the airlock, wearing the same simple blue diplomatic uniform she had worn when leaving the council chamber 6 months ago. The sight of her calm confidence made Veltar's shame burn even deeper. "Chancellor," she said politely, offering a formal bow that acknowledged his rank without showing subservience. "Welcome to Terra Station. I trust your journey was comfortable." Veltar's blue skin had faded to gray with exhaustion and stress. The proud leader who had once commanded 47 star systems now looked like a broken old being clutching desperately to the remnants of his authority. "Ambassador Chen," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I come here not as Chancellor of the Galactic Council, but as a representative of the surviving member species. We need help." Sarah led him through corridors that bustled with activity. Humans worked alongside beings from dozens of species, some that Veltar recognized as former council members, others that were completely unknown to him. "These are refugees from the Tau Ceti conflict," Sarah explained as they passed a group of crystal-based beings receiving medical treatment. The Crystalline Collective asked for our assistance in evacuating their people when the fighting reached their homeworld. You're providing aid to species that remained loyal to the Council? We're providing aid to people who need help, Sarah corrected gently. The Terran Cooperative doesn't hold grudges against entire populations because of their leaders' decisions. They passed a laboratory where human and ethereal scientists worked together on some complex project. Their different approaches to problem-solving, creating breakthrough solutions, neither could achieve alone. In another section, human mediators helped resolve a dispute between Mantari refugees and their hegemony hosts. Everything Veltar saw contradicted what he had believed about humanity. These weren't the inferior beings he had dismissed as servants. They were the architects of a new kind of civilization, one based on cooperation rather than domination. How many species have joined your cooperative? He asked. 17 so far, with 12 more in negotiations, Sarah replied. But joining isn't automatic. Every species must demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence and mutual respect. They entered a conference room where other members of the human delegation waited. Veltar was surprised to see several familiar faces, former council ambassadors who had chosen to work with humanity rather than against it. Ambassador Taleth of the gardener species rose from her seat, her tree-like form rustling with what he recognized as embarrassment. Chancellor Veltar, I didn't expect to see you here. Taleth? But your species voted to maintain council membership. Our leaders did, she said sadly. But many of us have come to understand that the council's way of thinking brought this disaster upon us. We've learned more about true cooperation in 6 months with humans than we did in 6 centuries with the council. Sarah took her seat at the head of the table. But Veltar noticed something significant. The table was round, with no elevated positions. Every representative sat as equals, regardless of their species' technological advancement or military power. Chancellor, Sarah began, before we discuss any potential assistance, I need you to understand something. The Terran Cooperative is not the Galactic Council with different management. It's based on completely different principles. She activated a holographic display showing the cooperative's charter. Every member species has equal voice in decisions that affect them. Cultural differences are celebrated, not suppressed. No species is required to conform to another's values, but all must respect others' right to their own way of life. Veltar studied the document with growing amazement. The organizational structure was unlike anything he had ever seen. Instead of hierarchical command chains, it showed interconnected networks of cooperation. Rather than central authority, it distributed decision-making to local levels where possible. How do you prevent chaos? He asked. Without central control, surely there must be conflicts. Of course there are conflicts, laughed Dr. James Park, a human xenopsychologist. The difference is how we handle them. When the Alcarian colony and the Centauri miners had their dispute over asteroid mining rights, we didn't impose a solution from above. We helped them find a compromise that worked for everyone. That took 3 months of negotiations. Yes, and the solution has held for 2 years without any enforcement necessary. Compare that to council rulings that required military intervention to maintain. Veltar was forced to admit the point. How many council decisions had been obeyed only because of the threat of force? How many resentments had built up over centuries of imposed solutions? What do you want from the surviving council species? He asked directly. Sarah leaned back in her chair. We want the same thing we always wanted, Chancellor. To be treated as equals, to have our voices heard, to work together as partners rather than masters and servants. But surely you want revenge, reparations, some acknowledgement of how wrong we were? What would be the point? Dr. Park shrugged. Revenge doesn't solve problems or build better societies. We're more interested in preventing future disasters than punishing past mistakes. An aide entered the room and whispered something to Sarah. Her expression grew serious. "Chancellor, I've just received word that the Void Swarm has requested permission to address this meeting. Are you prepared to face them?" Veltar's skin went pale. The idea of sitting in the same room with beings he had spent decades trying to destroy was terrifying, but he was no longer in a position to make demands. Minutes later, 3 beings entered the room unlike anything in Council records. They moved like living shadows, their forms shifting between solid and energy. When they spoke, their words came as harmonized tones that the translation devices struggled to interpret. "We who sing between stars greet the remnant of the rigid council," their spokesperson intoned. "The song weavers of Earth have taught us that conflict can become harmony with proper understanding." Sarah served as translator, her time with the swarm having given her insight into their unique communication style. "They're saying that humans helped them understand that the Council's expansion wasn't intentional aggression, but cultural misunderstanding. In return, they've agreed to establish protected migration routes that don't conflict with inhabited systems. You negotiated peace with them in months. When we fought them for decades, we listened to them," Sarah said simply. "We tried to understand what they actually wanted instead of assuming they were mindless aggressors. It turns out they were just trying to follow traditional breeding migration routes that Council expansion had blocked." The swarm representative continued singing, their tones creating complex harmonies that somehow conveyed deep emotion. Sarah listened intently before translating. "They say that humans showed them how different minds can work together without losing their unique nature. They want to offer the same opportunity to other Council species if those species are willing to learn new ways of thinking." Over the next several hours, Veltar learned about the new galaxy that was emerging from the ashes of the Council. It was smaller than the old empire, but more stable, more diverse in its approaches to problems, but more unified in its commitment to peaceful cooperation. Species that joined the cooperative didn't lose their identity. They enhanced it through contact with radically different ways of thinking. Human creativity merged with ethereal logic to produce scientific breakthroughs. Mantari engineering combined with Gardner biological insights to create sustainable technologies. Even the Void Swarm's unique perspective on space-time contributed to navigation innovations. "We're not trying to rebuild the Council," Sarah explained. "We're trying to build something better, something that brings out the best in every species rather than enforcing conformity." As the meeting wound down, Veltar found himself facing a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could cling to the old ways and lead the remaining Council species into irrelevance and eventual extinction. Or he could admit that humans had been right all along about cooperation being stronger than domination. "What would you need from us to consider accepting Council survivors into your cooperative?" he asked finally. Sarah exchanged glances with the other human representatives before answering. "Proof that you understand what went wrong. Demonstration that you're committed to treating all species as equals, and patience while you learn new ways of thinking. No trials for war crimes, no punishment for our past actions." "Chancellor," Sarah said gently, "we're more interested in preventing future wars than punishing past ones. Show us you've learned from your mistakes, and we'll help you build a better future." 6 months later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the Assembly Hall of New Geneva Station, addressing the first meeting of the expanded Galactic Cooperative. Representatives from 37 species filled the round chamber, their diverse forms creating a living rainbow of galactic diversity. "6 months ago," she said, "we gathered here as strangers forced together by necessity. Today, we meet as partners working toward common goals. We've learned that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. We've discovered that cooperation achieves more than competition." In the audience, former Chancellor Veltar listened with wonder and humility. His people, the proud Zephyrians, were now junior members of an organization led by the species they had once dismissed. But instead of resentment, he felt hope. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was growing stronger through unity rather than conquest. The Void Swarm representative rose to address the assembly, their harmonic voice carrying new notes of joy. Sarah translated their message. They say that the song of the galaxy has never been more beautiful than it is today, because every voice is free to sing its own unique part. As the assembly erupted in cheers, applause, and various alien expressions of approval, Sarah reflected on humanity's journey. They had never wanted to rule the galaxy or prove their superiority. They had simply wanted to be accepted as equals and allowed to contribute their unique gifts to galactic civilization. The irony was complete. In trying to deny humans equality, the Council had taught them that they didn't need anyone's permission to build a better world. And in learning to value cooperation over domination, the galaxy had finally become the civilization it had always had the potential to be. The age of empires was over. The age of partnerships had begun. And at its heart were the humans who had always known that strength came not from standing above others, but from standing together as equals.